Hey everybody, welcome back to the final day of set reviews on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and we're going to be taking a look at all of the multicolored artifacts and land cards in Amonkhet. And we're going to jump on in right now. On-Crop Champion is up first, 2 green-white for a creature human warrior at uncommon. It's a 4/4. You may exert On-Crop Champion as it attacks. When you do, untap all other creatures you control. This is fine. It's a 4/4 for 4, so it's perfectly on the vanilla test, and it's around kind of the ideal point of the vanilla test, where it's somewhat big and powerful, but it's not just a super dumb expensive 7/7 for 7, and it'll come down reliably. The effect is cool, but I somewhat feel like it's only going to be great to get around the sort of multiple exert creature deck. And I'm not sure if that'll exist or not. We'll have to see. Just giving your team pseudo vigilance doesn't seem that great. Still, at worst, this is a C+, and assuming you've built around it, I'm going to go on up to a B- with it. Haven Wind Guide is our Azorius card. 2 white-blue for a creature bird warrior at uncommon. It's a 2/3. It's got flying, it's got vigilance, and creature tokens you control have flying and vigilance. Embalm for 4 white-blue. This seems pretty decent. I'm not sure if I'm going to take it highly before being in one of these colors. I don't know if I'd ever first pick it. A 2/3 flyer for 4 is a little bit below curve, but if you're in a token-heavy, probably Embalm deck, then giving a segment of your creatures flying and vigilance is nuts. Again, I don't think you pick this first, but once I'm leaning towards the deck, it's a snap pick. Seems like a solid B to me. Bounty of the Luksa is our Simic rare, 2 green-blue for an enchantment at rare. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all flood counters from Bounty of the Luksa. If no counters were removed this way, put a flood counter on Bounty of the Luksa and draw a card. Otherwise, add colorless green-blue to your mana pool. It's a really roundabout way, and I'm really curious how many different revisions this wording went through. But basically, when you play this enchantment on your next pre-combat main phase, you're going to draw a card. Then your next pre-combat main phase, you're going to get 3 mana. Then the next one, draw a card. Then the next one, get 3 mana. Back and forth, back and forth. I do not super care for this at 4 mana. That's really pricey for an enchantment. Ramping yourself 3 mana from 5 to 8... because of course it'll be turn 5 that you get the 3 mana, and we're assuming you played your 5th land, just isn't that great. You're going to have, 1 card in your deck over 6 usually? Maybe 2? Drawing a card's cool, but it's only every other turn. Ultimately, I think this is just way too much nothing for limited, so I'm at a D on it. Decimator Beetle is Golgari, 3 black-green for a creature insected uncommon. It's a 4/5. When Decimator Beetle enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever Decimator Beetle attacks, remove a -1/-1 counter from target creature you control, and put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature defending player controls. So this is a 4/5. That if you put the counter on itself, it comes down as a 3/4, and then because it's green, immediately throws that counter away, pretending it never had a downside anyways, and attacks as a 4/5. Beyond that, it gets to throw a counter on one of your opponent's creatures, making them weaker, maybe killing them off. Who knows what the situation's going to be there, but I do know it's going to be good. As well, because the way it's worded, you can target a creature of yours that doesn't have a -1/-1 counter on it, and then you remove 0 -1/-1 counters from it, and the second creature, the opponent's creature, still gets the -1/-1 counter. This card's really good. Like, super good. I'm honestly surprised it's an uncommon. Yeah, this is just yet another complete win for the black-green counters deck. I've got this at a B+. I'd probably consider first picking this. And the second that I am even slightly in one of these 2 colors and this gets passed to me, instantly picking it. B+. Enigma Drake is up next. It's 1 blue-red for a creature drake at uncommon. It's a star 4. It has flying, and Enigma Drake's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So this, that red Minotaur, and that blue serpent are our 3 instants and sorceries matter cards, all at uncommon, which means the odds of you seeing and getting all 3 in a draft is very low. So no, I don't believe the instant and sorcery deck exists. So we're looking at this as being basically a 2/4 flyer for 3 on average, and that's kind of like almost an optimistic average, if I'm being honest. And it's certainly basically never going to be a 2-4 for 3 on turn 3. It's probably just going to be a 0-4 on turn 3. Yeah, this deck isn't here. I assume that these 3 cards were made for constructed to go with the Shadows and Eldritch Moon cards, because it was, of course, an archetype there for sure. Or we're going to see a whole lot more of this when Nicol Bolas shows up in Hour of Devastation. But for now, I'm pretty out on this card. I think it's relatively mediocre. I've got it at a D+. I don't think it fits any deck archetype in this format. Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons, is black-green for a legendary creature human cleric at rare. She's a 2/2. Whenever Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons deals combat damage to a player, you may put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Whenever you put one or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, yours or your opponent's, create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. Hapatra seems very, very, very good, but I do consider her first ability to basically be flavor text. If you're getting in with a 2/2, then there's no creatures on your opponent's side of the board to put counters on. And if there are creatures on your opponent's side of the board to put counters on, they're not going to let you get in with a 2/2. The second ability, though, is fantastic. In the black-green deck, you are going to have a ton of -1/-1 counters floating around on your creatures, your opponent's creatures, and getting a snake every time one of those things happens, for every exemplar-style creature, for every black removal spell that puts counters on things. And the snakes are Death Touch snakes. That's going to just completely turn off your opponent's game plan unless they are a flyer deck. Ultimately, I'd probably be very happy first picking her. I'm going to keep her at a B+ just because she is very fragile, but if she lives and you get some value out of her, that game's going to be a big problem for your opponent. Honored Crop Captain is red-white for a creature human warrior at uncommon. She's a 3/2. Whenever Honored Crop Captain attacks, other attacking creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. A 3/2 for 2 is totally fine, and it's above curve on the power side. Buffing your team is also good, and it's going to make short work of a stumbling opponent. Still, this will die the second you attack in and they have anything more than a 1-power creature on their side, but the run-over potential is real here. You know, if your opponent stumbles on turn 3 and, even worse, turn 4, you're going to be near on winning the game, attacking with this plus other creatures with higher power than they should have. It's not a high pick, but you'll always play it when you're red-white. It's probably not quite a signpost to jump into them, though. You know, if you're red and you've been flirting with blue and black and maybe some white, and then this comes by, I wouldn't say, oh, wow, this color archetype is totally open, but, you know, it still would be fine. I'm at a C+ on it. It's fine, but it's not near some of these other gold cards that we have. Kendra Charioteer is 1 red-green for a creature jackal warrior at uncommon. It's a 3/3, trample, and other creatures you control have trample as well. This is fine. It's a vanilla test passing 3/3 for 3. And, you know, if you're in red-green and you have some really big stompy things like a scaled behemoth or something, then giving those big gigantic things trample that don't already have it is definitely going to be a serious problem for most decks. Ultimately, this is just sort of a C+, though. It requires, you know, very specific board states, very specific creatures to come out while it's still alive, specific decks to be utilizing it, etc. So I'm just going to put it at a C+, but, you know, it's good, and you'll never not play it. Merciless Javelineer looks fantastic. 2 black-red for a creature Minotaur warrior uncommon. She's a 4/2. You can pay 2 generic mana and discard a card to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. That creature can't block this turn. So hold up, this is 2 mana to enable Heckbent, to enable my cycling discard payoff cards, my Archfiend of Ifnir or my black enchantment that people yelled at me for liking, potentially kill or at least weaken an opposing creature, trigger any of my black counters, cards matter, Nest of Scarabs or whatever, and push through for damage? This seems amazing. All rolled up into a 4/2. I'm all over this card. I will snap it up the second I see it if I'm even slightly red or black. I don't think it's quite a first pick still, but I'm very, very high on this card. I feel like it's a giant signpost. If you see this, red-black is open. This should not be going past, you know, pick 3 or pick 4, I would say. I'm at a B on this. I think it's fantastic. Neheb the Worthy is our next legendary. 1 black-red for a legendary creature Minotaur warrior at rare. He's a first strike, 2/2. Other Minotaurs you control have first strike. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, Minotaurs you control get +2/+0. Whenever Neheb the Worthy deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. I don't super care for Neheb. He's fine. He's totally fine. That's a whole lot of text and abilities going on there. Ultimately, this is just kind of like a finely priced first strike bear. You know, a 3 mana 2/2 first strike that might someday become a 4/2, and it'll power up maybe some of your other cards. There's only about 7-ish Minotaurs in the entire set, and many of them are at uncommon. I don't think a Minotaur's deck exists, unfortunately. Maybe when Hour of Devastation comes around. Not right now, I don't think. If I'm red-black, I'll certainly pick this up, but I'm not viewing it as a clear defined reason to jump into those colors. I've got it as a C+. You're playing it in those colors, but you're not, going out of your way in the pick order to grab it. A card that you are going out of your way to grab is Nissa, Steward of Elements. X green-blue for a Planeswalker Nissa at Mythic. She has X loyalty. It's whatever you pump into the X of the spell. You can +2 her to scry 2. Cool. You can pay 0 to look at the top card of your library, and if it's a land card or a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of loyalty counters on this Steward of Elements, you may put that card directly onto the battlefield. And then her -6, her ultimate, which you might just be able to do immediately after casting her, depending on how much mana you pump in, is untap up to 2 target lands you control. They become 5/5 elemental creatures with flying and haste until end of turn. They're still lands. Yeah, Nissa just seems absolutely amazing. The fact that she scales so well depending on where you are in the game is really cool. I'd potentially cast her on turn 3 for 1 loyalty, I think. Because then you'd immediately scry 2, get her to 3, and as long as you had a creature to stand in the way, she'd stay alive. You could get up to 5 at that point, or roll the dice on getting a free card on the battlefield. And then, of course, if you're on turn 10 and you've got a whole bunch of mana sticking around, you can play her, immediately ultimate her, and have 10 damage in the air out of nowhere. Nissa just seems absolutely bonkers, just like the other 2 Planeswalkers in the set. I'll snap her up every single time I see her. I'm going to give her a solid A. Liliana gets to keep that A+. I'm not quite going to put Nissa there, but she's real good. Samut, Voice of Dissent, is 3 red-green for a legendary creature human warrior at Mythic who has every single keyword you could ever imagine on a red-green creature. She's a 3/4 with Flash, Double Strike, Vigilance, and Haste. Your other creatures you control have haste, and you can also pay white out of nowhere and tap her to untap another target creature. This is just keyword soup. I have no clue lore-wise why all of these abilities come together in this one person, but sure. Ultimately, she's going to function as probably like a 5-mana removal spell if you flash her into block. If she lives through that, you've got yourself an untapper if you have splashed for white, which is interesting, but far less impactful than an actual tapper is. Ultimately, I don't know. I think she's good. Like, she's obviously good. She's a 3/4 Double Strike Vigilance haste flash. That can't not be good. I don't know if I'd ever really splash for her ability, though, if I was red-green, but I'll play her every single time. I think she's really good. Just a little bit of a mess of words here. I've got her at an A-. She's really good just because if a card has every keyword, it's typically really good. Shadowstorm Vizier is up next. It's blue-black for a creature human cleric at uncommon. She's a 1/3 with flying. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, Shadowstorm Vizier gets +1/+1 until end of turn. A 1/3 flyer for 2 that only comes down on 2 if you have the perfect mana, of course, is fine, but it's not exciting. And like Heckma Sentinels, +1/+1 just does not feel like enough of a payoff for me. At least this one can fly through, I guess. But getting in for 2 and rarely 3 is not that exciting. I'm not going to say no to this. It's fine if it shows up, mid-packish, late-packish, and I'm heading down the blue-black cycle plan. I'll take it, and I'll always play it. But I think it's a C+ at an absolute maximum. Temmet, Vizier of Nactaman, is white-blue for a legendary creature human cleric at rare. He's a 2/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature token you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. Embalm for 3 white-blue. Temmet looks pretty darn good as well in the blue-white Embalm deck for sure. He's a 2/2 for 2, which is great right there. The worst part about him is that he is just a bear. for much of the early game, until you get one of those tokens down, until an embalmed creature of yours has died and come back, or until you've made, 1/1s off of a card that we'll see in just a few minutes, then it's just a bear. But once the embalmed creatures start coming out, once the tokens start coming out, and you start getting unblockable tokens every turn, it's going to be really good. Seems quite solid. The gold's going to probably stop me from first picking it frequently, I think. But it is really, really, really good. So I'm going to go with a B+ on it. I think it's going to suck to play against this. Thankfully, being a 2/2, he is very fragile. It's been a while since we've said the word zombie. Wayward Servant is white and a black for a creature zombie at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Whenever another zombie enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Hey guys, there's a zombie deck in this format. You should probably play it. Some of these cards have subtly hinted at the fact that there's a zombie deck. You might have missed it, but there's a zombie deck. This is nice enough if you're in the zombie deck. Even if you're not dedicated zombies, if you're white-black, you'll probably still just have enough zombies to get some incidental value out of this. Looks like a C+ to me. It'll sometimes swing way above that grade if you are super dedicated to the zombie plan. I'll put it at a C+ on average, but it is definitely better than that when you do build around it. Weaver of Currents is our final not Aftermath gold card. It's 1 green/blue for a creature Naga Druid at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. This seems really solid. Ramping 2 mana on turn 3 seems quite nice. If we drop a Naga Vitalist on turn 2, we're looking at potentially 7 mana on turn 4. Sign me up. I'm not sure I'll first pick this like I would potentially a mono green dork sometimes in some decks or in some packs in some formats, but I'll still snag this pretty darn highly when I'm green or blue and go into ramp shenanigans. I've got this at a B. I love mana dorks. I love double mana dorks. All right, we've got 10 more Aftermath cards. We looked at 5 of them, 1 for each color, but now we have all the color pairs. Up first, we have Start to Finish. Start to Finish is 2 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Create 2 1/1 white warrior creature tokens with Vigilance. Finish is 2 and a black for a sorcery with Aftermath. As an additional cost to cast Finish, sacrifice a creature. Destroy target creature. I like Start to Finish quite a bit. It just seems really solid in the white-black deck. 2 1/1s at instant speed is nice, and it serves as either a surprise blocker or just an end-of-the-turn mana dump. Then later, having unconditional removal at the expense of a creature when you have at least 2 tokens that have come out prior in the game, and likely more value sack targets because white-black has a bunch of them, seems really good. Assuming I'm in black-white, I play this every time, and I take it a little bit highly at B-. I would also play Start in most white decks, I think, but a little bit lower there. But yeah, B- for Start to Finish. Reduce to Rubble is our blue-red Aftermath spell. Reduce is 2 and a blue for an instant at uncommon. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. It's an expensive mana leak. Rubble is 2 and a red for a sorcery with Aftermath. Up to the 3 target lands don't untap during their controller's next untap step. I like this card a little bit more than I should. It's not great. It's not great. Let me get that out of the way right now. 3 mana leak is not great. It's going to lose some of the usability that mana leak has. Mana leak rapidly falls off on effectiveness as the turns go on and your opponent starts to get excess mana. So being 3 mana, definite downside. Following it up by tapping down 3 of your opponent's lands is a serious tempo play and kind of a dick move. But I do love when there is a blue-red tempo deck in formats. Ultimately, I think realistically this is probably around a C-, maybe even a D+, but I'm probably going to start out picking it a little bit higher, like a C or C+, but, do as I say, not as I do. It's a D+ for real. Destined to Lead is our Golgari uncommon. Destin is 1 and a black for an instant uncommon. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Lead is 3 and a green for a sorcery with Aftermath. All creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. +1/+0 and indestructible is a fine combat trick. It's generally playable-ish, kind of at the C grade. I wouldn't not play this, but I wouldn't be, diving out of my way to play it either. The lead side is quite nice, though. Lure effects should never, ever, ever be underestimated, but they always are. They flat out end games. But with this one, you're broadcasting to your opponent loudly that you're going to do it. because it's just going to be sitting there in your graveyard. The only way you get around that is by paying 4 green black, casting both halves of this one after the other in your main phase, and that's an awful lot for a lure effect. I'm very curious to see how this plays out, but I think it's going to be slightly less good than your average lure effect. I'm going to keep it at a C-. Onward to Victory is our Boros uncommon Aftermath. Onward is 2 and a red for an instant at uncommon. Target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is its power. So typically 2, 3, maybe 4. Victory is 2 and a white for a sorcery with Aftermath. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. I am not terribly impressed by either of these cards or the card as a whole. Onward seems really weak. At best, unless we're just entering Magical Christmas Land, this is like +4. And if your opponent has a jump blocker, they just jump block this now giant creature, this 8 power creature. If they don't have a board, you're winning anyways. Just play a different creature. Just play an actual creature, something that affects the board. The victory side of it seems even worse. Double strike that your opponent sees coming, several turns away as it sits in your graveyard. No, thank you. Unlike many of the other cards combined at 4 red-white in your main phase, this still sounds awful. At least a few of these mediocre split cards, I can kind of say, well, if you cast the whole thing one after another, it can be decent. But this one's still, terrible outside of the situation where you're already winning. Extremely mediocre. I've got it at D-. I'm totally out on Onward to Victory. Spring to Mind is up next. Spring is 2 and a green for a sorcery at uncommon. Search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Mind is 4 blue for an instant with Aftermath that says draw 2 cards. Also known as the most expensive divination, or I guess inspiration because it's instant speed, ever. Not super sold on Spring to Mind. Spring is okay. 3 mana for a ramp spell isn't ideal. I significantly prefer them to be 2. Mind, on the other hand, is just excruciatingly expensive, but at least it's instant and it's free. It comes with Spring. It's a mana dump on your opponent's turn. It's just not something I'm going to go out of my way to get. I'll pick it up mid to late mid pack when I'm these 2 colors and play it here or there, but I'll also cut it a fair bit. Might even use it to splash, I suppose, if I have, something that I really want to go grab. But, I just have this at a middle of the road C. Now we're going to move into the rare split cards. Up first is Prepare to Fight. Prepare is 1 and a white for an instant at rare. Untap target creature. It gets +2/+2 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Fight is 3 and a green for a sorcery with Aftermath. Target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. This looks really, really good to me. Really good to me. Yes, I know that a lot of people have said, but these are very common cards, and why is it at rare? Well, it's at rare because it would utterly break limited if this was at common or at uncommon, because you're getting a free card. Remember that. The second Aftermath card is a free card draw, which is really good. Prepare looks like a decent, spell to me. It looks like a decent little combat trick. On tapping, giving +2/+2, and lifelink is going to be a bit of a swing. If it's a creature getting through for damage, it'll be a huge life swing. It'll eat a creature, etc. All kinds of stuff going on there. And then having a free fight card, even if it costs 4 for a prey upon, is fine. You're going to cast this later in the game. You're going to get to kill a creature. Yeah, it's 4 times as expensive as what we're used to, but it was a free card. This seems great to me. This seems like a relatively high pick. I would treat it as removal. I've got it at a B-. I really like it. Failure to Comply is next. Failure is 1 and a blue for an instant at rare. Return target spell to its owner's hand. Comply is a single white mana for a sorcery with Aftermath. Choose a card name. Until your next turn, your opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name. This does not seem very good. Failure is a bad remand because you don't even get to draw the card. Well, yeah, you do draw a card. It's just the draw sucks. You draw a card called Comply, which is frankly a waste of a single white mana. Taking them off a spell for 1 turn is fine, but I'm not sure I'd even play this most of the time if I was in blue-white and I had it. It's probably just a D+. It doesn't do enough. If there was a real tempo deck in the format, like a lot of bounce and a lot of stuff like that, I could see it. If this was a blue-black spell, I could maybe see it in a slightly more controlling deck. Like maybe you bounce the spell and then you stop it from being cast, and then you hold up a counter spell and you counter it next turn, and you've like, time walked them a couple of times. But blue-white just doesn't fit, so D+. Rags to Riches is up next. Rags is 2 black for a sorcery at rare. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Riches is 5 blue for a sorcery with Aftermath. Each opponent chooses a creature he or she controls. You gain control of those creatures. Oh, we started off so good with Prepare to Fight, but this is another card that I really just don't care for. I'm not a fan of -2/-2 sorceries generally anyways. Bile Blight, etc. Never really kind of caught me. Tacking on the worst and most expensive control magic we've ever seen? I'm out. The fact that the opponents choose the creature for you, that's horrible. For 7 mana, this card just seems awful. It's not something I'm going to touch. I'll keep it at like a sideboard D range because maybe the -2/-2 works out for you in some matchups, but I'm out on this card. Another D. Cut to Ribbons finally gets us back to a better card. Cut is 1 in red for a sorcery at rare. Cut deals 4 damage to target creature. Awesome. Ribbons is X black for a sorcery with Aftermath. Each opponent loses X life. Cut is great. Cut is a card that I will play in every single red deck ever. It's, 4 damage to a creature for 2. I don't care that it's not instant speed. I'll play it in every single red deck. And Ribbons is a great later game sink. Your opponent gets to see it coming a mile away, though, so you'd best bet they're going to try to kill you as quickly as humanly possible. But a relatively high pick for me once I'm in these colors, and a high pick the second I know I'm red. I'd potentially even first pick Cut in some really weak packs. And the fact that this would be my rare in that pack suggests it has the potential of being a weak pack anyways. I'm at just a straight up B on this. I think it's really good. Our final Aftermath card, our final multicolored card is Heaven to Earth. Heaven is X and a green for an instant at rare. Heaven deals X damage to each creature with flying. Earth is X red for a sorcery with Aftermath. Earth deals X damage to each creature without flying. I don't really care for this one either. I think it's pure sideboard card. The first half, Heaven, just doesn't do anything against a number of decks. If they don't have flyers, what are you going to do? Are you going to pay this for green to throw it away and draw Earth? And Earth isn't even that great either. I don't think red-green ever really wants to be running a Wrath. Maybe your creatures are big enough to live through it and you kill off your opponent's ones, but it's also a Wrath that your opponent is extremely aware of. It's gonna be sitting there in your graveyard, and they're gonna say, oh, okay, I'm not going to play a whole bunch of creatures. I'm out on this. I'm gonna leave it in the sideboard. I'll pop it up to a D+, because yes, if you're against flyers, it's a great card to put in, but I'm never starting this in the main deck. All right, let's move on to artifacts. We've got a whole bunch of them, a number of legendary ones. Thankfully, nowhere near the artifact block that we just left, and I'm very glad of that. I'm very glad that our packs are going to be filled with colors and playable spells. Up first is Bontu's Monument. Bontu's Monument is 3 generic mana for a legendary artifact at uncommon, and just like the other monuments, it says blank, in this case black, creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. They all say that. As well, every monument has something that happens every time you cast a creature spell. Bontu's Monument says whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. This seems awful. This seems really awful. 3 mana is a lot to ask for. You can't even stack these because they're legendary. A single mana discount just isn't worth this. I would not play a 3 mana dork that only works on creatures unless it had some amazing other ability attached to it. The ability attached to this, the effect attached to it, I don't really care for it. The amount of damage that you'll get out of this in most games would probably be matched by playing a 3-drop creature instead of this thing. I'm out on it. I think this is garbage. I'm at an F. I just do not think this card's playable. Edifice of Authority is on the complete other end of the spectrum. 3 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon, just like Bontu's Monument. You can pay 1 generic mana and tap it, and target creature can't attack this turn. Put a brick counter on Edifice of Authority. Then you can pay 1 and tap it until your next turn. Target creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. However, you can only activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Edifice of Authority. So you have to activate it 3 times, and then from then on, instead of getting target creature can't attack, you get Arrest on a Stick, which is really, really, really good. I like this a lot. It feels like Pacification Array all over again. The first 3 activations are very defensive. You're not going to be using that to get in for damage, so this probably doesn't go in the hyper aggro deck. But then, after 3 activations, you've got a 1-turn Arrest on a Stick. That means that you're stopping attacks, you're stopping blocks so you can get in for damage. Maybe you turn off their flyer and fly in with your own flyers. This belongs in a control deck amazingly well. Mid-range would love it, tempo would love it. Even some aggro decks that aren't, the hyper all-in aggro would probably play this. Seems like a solid A to me. Seems like a solid first pick. I'll be first picking this card a lot of the times that I see it. Embalmer's Tools are 2 generic mana for an artifacted uncommon. Activated abilities of creature cards in your graveyard cost 1 less to activate. Tap an untapped zombie you control. Target player puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This card is also really, really, really terrible. It's just not worth a card slot to me. There's not that many embalm creatures in this set. If we're looking at commons and uncommons, white has 7, blue has 3, black, red, and green have 0. Other people at the table are going to be taking some of those embalm creatures as well. So odds are this is only really going to hit a few creatures in your deck. Otherwise, it's just a card that's doing nothing. But oh, you can tap a zombie to mill a card. That does not do anything at all unless you have like 50 zombies out. Well, I guess technically you could pull it off with like 25 zombies and mill somebody out. But it's just not happening. Don't try it. I would love to see somebody try the Embalmer's Tools zombie mill deck, but don't try it. Let me know if you do, but I'm at an F on this. I think it's just utter garbage. Gate to the Afterlife is 3 generic mana for an artifacted uncommon. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life. Then you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. And then there's some flavor text. It says, pay 2 generic mana, tap it, sacrifice Gate to the Afterlife, search your graveyard, hand, and or library for a card named God Pharaoh's Gift, and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. Activate this ability only if there are 6 or more creature cards in your graveyard. The card God Pharaoh's Gift does not exist. It's presumably going to be an Hour of Devastation, but it doesn't exist, so the entire second half, or I guess really 2/3 of this card, is flavor text. So the part of this card that matters, at least for this draft format, until Hour of Devastation comes out, is garbage. Yet again, getting a life and a loot off a creature dying and wasting turn 3 in a card slot in my deck, just not worth it. Another F. Hazoret's Monument is up next. Like the other ones, it's 3 generic mana for a legendary artifact at uncommon. It makes sure red creature spells cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So you get to rummage whenever you cast a creature spell with Hazoret's Monument, and I think that is pretty terrible as well. Same thing for the cost discount, and attaching rummage to every creature you cast is cool, but it's nowhere near worth the 3-drop slot that this takes up in your deck. You can get the value back just by playing anything else that affects the board instead of this card. So I'm at an F for Hazoret's Monument as well. Honed Khopesh is up next. Honed Khopesh is a single generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +1/+1, equip cost of 1. Yeah, this is not good equipment. This is about as cheap as you can get for equipment and about as unpowerful as you can get for equipment. +1/+1 equipment just is never really worth it. It's such a minimal upgrade to the creatures that it's on. Maybe if you're in a Flyers deck or a deck with a whole bunch of evasion and you're really struggling for your last card, you could get by playing this. But otherwise, just play something else. This barely feels like a card. I've got it at D-. Kefnet's Monument steps up to the plate to try to swing, and it's a miss as well. 3 generic mana for legendary artifact uncommon. Blue creature spells you cast 1 less cast whenever you cast a creature spell. Target creature an opponent controls doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. It doesn't even tap the creature. F. Luksa River Shrine is up next. Luksa River Shrine is yet another 3 generic mana artifacted common. You pay 1 generic mana and tap it. You gain 1 life. Hoo-boy, yay! Put a brick counter on Luksa River Shrine. Tap it. You gain 2 life. Whoa! Activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Luksa River Shrine. So you need to invest 6 mana and a minimum of probably 4, maybe 3 turns to gain 3 life. And then start gaining 2 life once a turn. No, this is bad. This is real bad. This would need to be like 6 life, 10 life. Then I might play it. As is, it's a straight F. Do not play this card. It is terrible. Oketra's Monument is up next. Oketra's Monument is 3 generic mana for a legendary artifact and a common white creature spells you cast 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. This one's not going to get an F, guys. It's not going to go that much higher, though. Again, the discount, I don't care about it. I don't want to pay 3 mana for that discount, whatever. But getting a 1/1 creature is ever so slightly better. But still, unless I'm wanting some token production for a sack outlet or a going wide plan or something like that, this is still just going to be like a D-. Oracle's Vault is up next. It's 4 generic mana. We're going up in price for an artifact at rare. Pay 2 generic mana, tap it, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. Play, not cast. So if it's a land and you haven't played one yet this turn, you can play it. Put a brick counter on Oracle's Vault. Tap it, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Oracle's Vault. I want this to be good. I love playing things for free off the top of my library. Feels kind of good. Feels like I'm cheating. But let's examine that, shall we? We're looking at a minimum turn 8 before we can have 3 bricks on this and start using it. We've also invested 10 mana. Ultimately, I feel like the time and mana could just be so much better used elsewhere, especially if your opponent's packing any sort of artifact hate in their sideboard. It would suck to put 10 mana into this, and then on that final tap and that final brick counter, they just go, oops, I sided this in. Sorry you wasted all that time and mana. Realistically, this is probably like a C-. I'm going to treat it like a B+. I'm going to first pick it the first time I see it, for sure. But in reality, it's probably a C-. Pyramid of the Pantheon is up next. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact at rare. Pay 2 generic mana, tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. The opposite of efficiency. Put a brick counter on Pyramid of the Pantheon. Tap it, add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Pyramid of the Pantheon. I strongly dislike the idea of spending 2 mana to make 1 mana. And doing that 3 times to finally get access to 3 mana, I'm totally out. This is so much mana and time put into this to get basically nothing out of it. Yeah, this is way too slow to be anything worthwhile. I'm at an F on this. Rhodes' Monument is up next. Rhodes' Monument is 3 generic mana for legendary artifact and uncommon. Green creature spells you cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. This one's kind of like the Oketra's Monument. It's not quite an F, but I still just don't really care about it. +2/+2 just isn't enough for me. It still just feels like a complete waste of a slot in my deck. This would feel so bad if you have a blank board and you play a creature and you give it +2/+2. It doesn't have haste. Nothing's going to happen to it. No, I'm totally out on these monuments. I don't think you should play a single one of them. D- for Rhodes' Monument. Throne of the God Pharaoh is up next. It's 2 generic mana. We finally got a bit of a discount here for a legendary artifact at rare. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the number of tapped creatures you control. This really fights against itself pretty hard. The aggro deck wants to play this. It's going to tap its creatures and attack, and it's going to get a bunch of damage out of it. But the aggro deck does not want to do a damn thing other than play a creature on turn 2. And 3 and 4 and 5 for that matter. It doesn't have time to play something like this. And then the more mid-rangey decks get what? A few points of damage out of this here or there. I'm just not bothering with this. It just doesn't seem to work anywhere that you'd want it to. I've got it at, you guessed it, another F. Our final artifact is Watchers of the Dead. Watchers of the Dead is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature cat. It's another cat for your Caracal. At uncommon, it's a 2/2. Exile Watchers of the Dead. Each opponent chooses 2 cards in his or her graveyard and exiles the rest. Yeah, this is a bear with what is attempting to be an upside, but it's frankly a terrible upside because your opponent is going to pick the 2 Embalm cards they want or the 2 Aftermath cards they want. They get to pick the cards. That's terrible. So really, this is just a C. It's just a 2/2 for 2. Cut it whenever you have a chance to cut it. Play it and don't feel terrible about it, but middle of the road C. So that got us through the garbage fire that is artifacts. If you're new to Magic and you've only been around in Kaladesh, this is how most sets go. Most sets have a number of artifacts that are frankly awful. So this is not out of the ordinary. First, pick those Edifices of the Authority and ignore every other artifact in this set. We are almost done. We just have the lands. Up first, we have the Cycle of Cycle lands. We have Canyon Slough, Fetid Pools, Irrigated Farmland, Scattered Groves, and Sheltered Thicket. Each of these are true duals in that they have the basic land types. They're not basic lands, but they have the land types. So they are land Swamp Mountain or land Island Swamp. They're all at rare. Because they have those land types, they tap for the 2 mana that they can potentially produce, black or red in the case of Canyon Slough. They all enter the battlefield tapped, and they all have cycling for 2 generic mana. At the end of the day, this is a dual tap land in what's likely going to be a 2-color set, so the ceiling on these is just not very high. If they're in your 2 colors, you're going to be very happy playing them. You're not going to go out of your way. These are not first pick by any way, shape, or form. But yeah, the cycling part is what makes them really good. It makes them very similar to the temples in Theros. If you're one of the colors, you'll still play this card, because if you draw it on turn 1, you can play it, and it's going to be one of the colors you need. Or turn 2 or turn 3. And then if you draw it on turn 8, you just pay 2 mana and you turn it into something else, something that's hopefully not a land. So these are all just kind of C+. You're not going to go out of your way, but if you're the 2 colors, you're happy. If you're one of them, you're still going to play it. Cascading Cataracts is our next rare land. It's a land at rare. It's indestructible for some reason. You can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 5 and tap it to add 5 mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool. This seems terrible. You're hurting your mana base by playing a colorless land, and then later in the game you're paying 6 mana to get 5 in varying colors. Not even in a deck where I'm splashing would I play this land. I'm out. Straight F. Cradle of the Accursed is our first desert. It's a land desert egg common. We talked about a desert with Sheffet Monitor. I think there was one other card that mentioned desert. I can't remember. Anyways, you can tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool, or you can pay 3, tap it, and sack it to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. This doesn't seem terribly great either. I'm not going to go to my way to play it. Again, hurting your mana base is just not worth it. Drawing this when you needed your color, having this in your opening hand, it all feels so bad. Late game, cool. I can turn it into a 2/2. That's the most relevant. But early on, playing a colorless land is a real pain point. Sacrificing it early on is completely out of the question. I'm at a D+ on this. I'm just not going to play it. Evolving Wilds is back. Evolving Wilds is a land at common. Tap it, sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Evolving Wilds is always just kind of fine. I'll play it in 2-color decks just to smooth out my mana a bit. It hurts a little bit coming down later in the game, but it's a fantastic turn 1 play and makes some hands way more keepable than they would have been otherwise. I won't take it too highly, but I'll generally play it. And of course, if you're splashing, it's even better. So I've got it at a middle of the road C. Grasping Dunes is our next desert. It's a land desert at uncommon. Tap it, add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Pay 1, tap it, sacrifice Grasping Dunes, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. This one is definitely better than Cradle of the Accursed. Again, I don't really want to hurt my mana base to do this, but a -1/-1 counter can be something big. Not being instant speed is a significant problem. In addition, your opponent knows this is coming. It's not going to come out of nowhere if you play this land. You can play it pay a mana, tap it, sack it, and do it as, basically a 2 generic mana spell. But that's a waste of a land drop, which is kind of hurtful. Later in the game, a -1/-1 counter is probably not going to be nearly as good. So as much as I do like this Desert in comparison to Cradle of the Accursed and the next one that we'll see, I think I'm still just on I want to say C-, but I think realistically it's a D+. I'm still just not going to hurt my mana base to really play these. Painted Bluffs is our next Desert. It's a land desert at common. Tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool. Pay 1, tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is a functional reprint of Shimmering Grotto, except it's a desert in addition to, or rather than being just a land. Shimmering Grotto, Painted Bluffs, not a good land. You do not want to be playing these. If you really desperately need to splash and you somehow completely missed on getting any other way of doing it, you can play it, but I do not recommend it. I recommend this as an absolute last resort. Remember, you're not paying 1 mana, you are paying 2, because you are tapping this land as well, in addition to the one that you used to pay for it. It's just really inefficient. Avoid it if you can. I've got it at D+. Sometimes you have to play it though, but you want those times to be few and far between. Our final card of Amonkhet, 269 cards, we've made it, Sun-Scorched Desert. It's a land desert at common. When Sun-Scorched Desert enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player. Tap it to add a colorless mana to your mana pool. Totally, utterly out on Sun-Scorched Desert. Hurting my mana base to do a single damage to a player is a terrible idea. But, John, what if I'm in an aggro deck and I want to do as much damage as possible? That's a great question. What happens on turn 2 when you draw your Sun-Scorched Desert and you can't cast your spells because you're missing your colors? Don't hurt your colors in an aggro deck. That's the worst place that you can hurt your colors. Sun-Scorched Desert, I'm at an F. I'm never touching this card. All right, that was a long week. There were a lot of cards in this set and a lot of stuff going on, but I am super excited for this set. As slightly worried as I am about the potential of black-green yet again being one of the most amazing decks in the format, there's just so much going on in this set. There's so many choices to make. There's so many decision trees to go through. There's so much cool stuff happening, and there's a ton of mana sinks, so I do think this is going to be a slightly slower format. So I am super excited for this. I will be at pre-releases this weekend and of course drafting it once it's up on Magic Online and at my local store. So this is not the end of Amonkhet material. I will of course have an Amonkhet related top 10 list tomorrow. I will have my pre-release recaps on the weekend. I'll be doing Amonkhet Crack-a-Packs starting next Tuesday. I will be doing drafting of Amonkhet on stream, all kinds of Amonkhet stuff leading up to the release and after. So make sure that you do stick around for all of that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at the Mana Leek. That's Leek, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at facebook.com/themanaleek, twitch.tv/themanaleek, and patreon.com/themanaleek, where you can become a backer and work your way towards a playmat and other various rewards. As always, click that like button if you like the content. Click subscribe if you want to see all that Amonkhet material coming up. And if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.